I guess a question I have whenever I hear people from the Orthodox world just kind of talking about how old their traditions are and how they go back to the first century, whenever I look in the book of Acts at what was going on in the early church in Jerusalem, I mean, to me, there was a lot of major problems in those churches. You know, for example, when the Apostle Paul goes back to Jerusalem, the Christians are all still meeting in the temple. They're still continuing a lot of the temple practices, which, I think it just hadn't been fully revealed yet that God was done with the things of the temple. I mean, you have the Apostle Paul constantly in his letters dealing with some pretty severe heresies that were going on in the churches that he had started that he's nipping right there. So, you know, doesn't it make more sense that as time goes on and as the knowledge of the Lord increases, that things would get better? And wouldn't you say it's not? I mean, I would say it's not necessarily good to follow that which is older. Why would I be wrong in that?
Uh, well, the prophet Jeremiah followed the ancient paths and diverge not from them. One of the things that I would point out is this difference between how Protestants see this and how we see this in terms of how the faith was delivered once and for all time to the saints. Mm-hmm. We believe that the fullness of faith was delivered to the church on the day of Pentecost. And since that time, nothing needs to be added to it. It needed over time, some things needed to be clarified. People had to find a way to express that truth so that people in their day and age would understand it. I mean, there was a reason why the Creed of Nicaea was written, for example. But I would argue against what you just said in the sense that if the apostles knew that the fullness of the faith had been delivered to them on the day of Pentecost, the Holy Spirit which now dwelt in them was going to lead them into all truth, why would they still have been going to the temple every single day to worship? Mm-hmm. That's because they still saw the fulfillment of everything Jesus represented in that temple. And a lot of the symbology of temple worship is in the Orthodox Church. We've still kind of retained that in the layout of our churches, and the idea of the Holy of Holies and things like that. The 7-branch candlestick is still there, And so you have these images with priests, for example. We priests are a continuation of the Aaronic priesthood. No, we're not descendants of Aaron, but we are a continuation of those that serve in the church. As priest of the Most High God. So these ideas that somehow God wasn't fully done with that, and he did it away with in AD 70, and after that, the Christians realized they didn't need liturgical worship anymore, but they were liturgically worshiping after that as well. And again, the Apostolic Fathers kind of show us that, and so I'm not sure that I'm convinced, I'm not sure the Orthodox Church would agree, that the idea of giving up old things was the way forward for the early church. The early church actually preserved a lot of Jewish practices. It was very much a Jewish church for decades, as we know. And the entry of the Gentiles into it didn't change that. It just meant the Gentiles didn't have to be circumcised. But the way in which they were going to worship was going to be the way the apostles taught them to worship, the way they were taught by Christ himself to worship. Remember that it says in the Old Testament about holding to the patterns of worship that have been revealed to you, Moses. Hold to the patterns that you saw in heaven, and these are the patterns you're going to practice in the temple. But that's also echoed in Hebrews, that we are to do the same thing now, and we're not to do away with it. So liturgical worship, liturgical patterns of worship, sacramental worship, was the norm and the standard from the very beginning.